The prayer rug lay spread toward Mecca, but Zainab's fingers moved across her phone screen with practiced urgency. Delete. Archive. Delete. Her recent posts as @ZarambitGirl needed to vanish before the sun rose. Last night's fashion show had been too good to miss, the kind of exclusive event that kept her 500,000 followers growing and brand deals flowing. The silver sequined gown she'd worn, with its daring cut and borrowed diamonds, had already garnered 50,000 likes. Now, like Cinderella's ball gown at midnight, it needed to disappear. The first hints of dawn painted her bedroom walls in shades of amber. Zainab switched phones, from the sleek iPhone 15 Pro Max she used for her influencer life to the modest Samsung her parents knew about. I wish I didn't have to juggle two worlds like this, she thought, carefully tucking the iPhone into a hidden pocket in her bag. It sometimes felt like she was living a secret life, one she both cherished and feared losing. Right on schedule, her mother's message appeared. Bint, don't forget the family meeting after Fajr prayers. Wear your blue hijab, the one Aunt Hadiza gave you. Zainab stared at the text, her heart fluttering with a mix of anticipation and dread. Let me guess what we'll talk about again today. Marriage, it's always marriage talk. She rubbed at the spot between her eyebrows. I need to be ready for whatever comes. With a steadying breath, she made up her mind to face the day, no matter which version of herself she had to be. Zainab caught her reflection in the mirror as she adjusted the mentioned hijab, making sure no stray hairs escaped. The face that gazed back at her was bare of the contoured perfection her followers knew, but her eyes held the same sharp intelligence that had built her secret empire. At 26, she straddled two worlds with the precision of a tightrope walker. One foot in her family's traditional expectations, the other in Zarambi's glittering social media landscape. Her wardrobe told the story better than words could. On one side, modest dresses and carefully coordinated hijabs. On the other, hidden behind a false wall she'd paid a discreet carpenter to install, hung the designer pieces that made @ZarambitGirl one of Zarambi's most influential fashion voices. Liberty prints from London, avant-garde pieces from Zarambi Fashion Week, and hand-beaded gowns from Dubai's finest ateliers. Each item carefully documented and monetized for her growing audience. The morning prayer call echoed from the nearby mosque, and Zainab quickly locked her influencer phone in its hidden compartment. As she turned toward her prayer rug, another message lit up her family phone. This one from her father. Ensure you dress appropriately. The imam's son and his family will be joining us. Zainab's fingers froze over the phone screen, her heart suddenly matching the rapid-fire pace of her earlier deletions. She knew what a meeting with an imam's son meant. At that moment, her other phone vibrated silently in its hiding place. No doubt the social media manager from Zara trying to finalize next week's major contract. I can't ignore them either. It's my chance to grow. She drew in a slow breath. How long can I juggle both worlds? The sun was rising over Zarambi, and with it, the careful balance of Zainab's two worlds was about to be tested in ways she had always feared but never truly prepared for. Afternoon light slanted through the small kitchen window, illuminating the faded tiles and casting long shadows across the table. Zainab sat there, scrolling mindlessly through her phone, the background noise of her own heartbeat magnified by the stillness of the house. She hardly noticed her sister Mariam enter until the hush was broken by a barely contained squeal. "Did you see your follower count today, Z?" Mariam asked in a hushed voice. She glanced at the hallway to make sure their parents weren't in earshot. "You just hit 100,000. Zainab froze. Her eyes darted from Mariam's phone to the half-eaten sandwich on her plate. "Wait, already?" Her heart thumped so loudly it nearly drowned out her words. "Yesterday, it was 98. I thought that was huge, but 100K?" Mariam slid into the seat across from her, phone in hand. "It's right here. 100,000 followers. You're practically famous." She lowered her voice and leaned forward. "It's only a matter of time before someone here recognizes your voice or your silhouette in all those outfit reels you post." Zainab's pulse spiked. She could almost hear it drumming in her ears. "I can't let anyone find out yet," she said, choosing each word as if it were a grenade with the pin half pulled. "You know how Mom and Dad feel about social media. They'll freak if they realize I'm not just scrolling through feeds but actually posting pictures of myself and my outfits. That's definitely not on their list of acceptable hobbies." Miriam sighed, concern etched into her features. "You're right, but how long can you keep this up? If your friends start tagging you, or if some massive brand decides to give you a public shout-out, you won't be able to hide behind @Zarambitgirl anymore." Zainab cast a nervous glance at the kitchen door, then at her phone clutched in her hand. She thought of the pile of emails and DMs from designers and brands waiting in her inbox. "That's what scares me," she admitted, voice cracking just a bit. "These brands want to work with me, and that means face-to-face meetings, photo shoots, maybe even video calls. How am I supposed to keep my identity hidden then?" For a moment, the only sounds in the kitchen were the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant clank of pots and pans from the other side of the house. Miriam reached across the table and touched Zainab's arm lightly, her gaze sincere. "You have a real gift, Z. I'm proud of you, but you can't live a double life forever. It's going to catch up with you." Zainab swallowed. She wanted to brush off her sister's concern with an easy smile, but her throat felt tight. "I know," she finally said, her eyes downcast. "It's just, once I tell them, everything changes, and I'm not sure I'm ready for that." Miriam nodded, understanding settling in her eyes. "I get it. You're afraid you'll lose all of this, your creative outlet, your freedom, if you expose it to Mom and Dad's scrutiny." Zainab sighed, setting her phone on the table. "Exactly. Plus, it's not just a hobby anymore, it's actually turning into a career." She paused, turning the device over in her hands. "But I also can't ignore reality. My follower count won't stop growing, and with every new milestone, I risk someone recognizing me. My anonymity is hanging by a thread." Outside, the late afternoon sun dipped low, painting the kitchen walls in dusty gold. A muffled clang from the living room signaled that their parents might head in soon, and Miriam's posture stiffened with caution. She squeezed Zainab's hand in a quick gesture of sisterly support. "I trust you, Z," she said softly. "But you should have a plan. Figure out how you're going to handle this, before it handles you." Zainab nodded, taking a steadying breath. "I will," she promised, forcing a small, determined smile. "I just need a little more time." A faint calling of their names drifted from the living room, and both sisters stood, the moment of raw honesty passing like a secret note slipped between the pages of a book. As they left the kitchen, Zainab felt a swirl of resolve and apprehension coil in her chest. Her handle was growing too fast for her to stay hidden forever, but for now, just for a little longer, she was determined to walk that delicate tightrope between her family's expectations and her own rapidly expanding world. 3 years ago, when Zainab first created @Zarambitgirl, it was meant to be nothing more than a creative outlet, a small act of rebellion against the constraints of her traditional upbringing. Back then, she had been a fresh graduate from the University of Zarambi, dutifully taking up an accounting position at her father's friend's firm. Her parents had been proud. Their daughter, following the path they'd laid out, seemed destined for a respectable, if predictable, life. But during lunch breaks and quiet evenings, Zainab had built something extraordinary. What started with iPhone photos of her carefully curated modest fashion choices evolved into a platform that celebrated all facets of Zarambi style. As her follower count grew, so did her courage. The modest fashion posts became just one facet of her content. Under the anonymous @Zarambitgirl handle, she could explore and showcase the full spectrum of Zaramban fashion, from traditional to avant-garde. The real turning point came 18 months ago, when a struggling local designer sent her a direct message asking if she'd feature one of their dresses. The post went viral, the designer's collection sold out, and Zainab discovered her true talent. She had an eye not just for fashion, but for business. She understood the delicate alchemy of influence, how to turn likes into sales, comments into contracts. Now, she earned more in a month through her social media presence than her official job paid in a year. Her platform had launched careers, sparked trends, and attracted international attention to Zarambi's fashion scene. Major brands sought her partnerships. Celebrities slid into her DMs requesting collaboration, and a team of 3 managed her growing empire, all operating under strict NDAs. But success came with a price. Each triumph required increasingly complex lies. Every brand event meant inventing work conferences or visits to imaginary friends. Her mother's questions about her designer bags, "Gifts from my bonus," she'd say, grew more frequent. The weight of deception pressed heavier with each passing day. Standing in her bedroom now, Zainab's phone illuminated with another notification. The Zara contract would be her biggest yet, a year-long partnership as their first Zaramben global ambassador, with billboards, TV spots, and Fashion Week appearances. The contract figure made her dizzy, enough to buy a house in Victoria Island to secure real independence. But her father's message about the imam's son felt like a ticking clock. In their community, meetings like this had one purpose: marriage. She thought she'd have more time, that she could gradually build her influence until it was too substantial to be dismissed, that she could find a way to merge her 2 worlds on her own terms. The gentle knock on her door startled her. "Zainab, it's time for prayers," her mother called, "and please don't wear any makeup to the meeting. The Suleimans are very traditional." Zainab looked at her reflection once more. The dutiful daughter in her blue hijab, the social media powerhouse with 500,000 followers watching her every move, the young woman caught between tradition and ambition. Both of her phones lay silent now, but she knew it was temporary. Soon they would demand answers, and she would have to choose, or find a way to keep dancing between the worlds she'd created. As soon as Zainab retreated to her bedroom, her pulse pounded so forcefully she could feel it in her fingertips. She sank onto the edge of her bed, phone in hand, replaying every moment of the tense family meeting in the living room. This has to be a dream. No, a nightmare. Her thumb hovered over her sister Mariam's contact for a heartbeat before she pressed call. The phone rang twice. "Z?" Mariam's concerned voice drifted through the line, laced with urgency. "What happened?" Zainab cleared her throat, willing her voice not to tremble. "It's worse than I imagined, Mariam. The family meeting was about me. They're pushing me to meet Imam Suleiman's son tonight. They're coming for dinner after Maghrib prayers. Ibrahim just flew in from London this morning." There was a rustling sound as though Mariam had stood up too quickly. "Ibrahim? I didn't think Mom and Dad were that serious about him yet." "Sis, the nikah ceremony will be in 8 weeks, inshallah," Zainab continued, echoing her father's words. "Dad said Ibrahim has a sterling reputation, an Islamic scholar like his father, living in London but returning to Zarambi to continue the family legacy. They've already discussed the main terms as per our traditions." 8 weeks? Mariam's voice registered shock. "Isn't your Zara campaign supposed to launch in 6 weeks?" She knew Zainab was due to attend a major fashion show in Paris, her first public appearance as a Zarambit girl. "What will you do?" Zainab suddenly remembered the contract waiting unsigned in her encrypted email, a contract that required her response within 48 hours. "Alhamdulillah," she murmured automatically, though her mind raced in a frenzy of calculations. How to postpone the wedding, how to speed up or delay the campaign, how to find an escape clause in either commitment. "Mom mentioned that Ibrahim's family is very particular about social media presence," Zainab added, her tone tense. "They believe too much online activity isn't appropriate for a scholar's wife. She actually said, 'You'll need to reduce your phone usage, Habibti. No more Instagram.'" A shaky sigh escaped her as she stared at the ceiling fan spinning overhead. It whirled too fast, mirroring the chaos in her mind. Apparently, they've been talking about this for a while. Now, they want everything official. Mariam's silence buzzed for a moment before a sharp intake of breath. "Z, that's practically tomorrow. Did you even get a chance to tell them how you feel?" Zainab gripped the phone as if it were a lifeline, her knuckles turning white. "I tried, but the words wouldn't come out. Mom was so excited, and Dad kept going on about it being a good match. I felt invisible." Mariam's voice softened. "I'm sorry." A pause, then a gentle nudge of encouragement. "Do you want me to talk to them? Or at least be there with you?" Zainab shook her head, though Mariam couldn't see her. "No, thank you, but I have to handle this myself. I just don't know how." Her next breath was shaky. "I barely made it through the meeting without crying." Miriam's empathetic sigh carried over the line. "Whatever happens, I'm here for you. We'll figure this out. You don't have to do it alone. Call me if you need me," she added gently. "I mean it." "I will," Zainab managed to say. "Thanks, sis." She hung up, the faint glow of the phone screen lingering in the dim room. Her own reflection stared back at her, wide-eyed, brow furrowed, fear shining in her gaze. 2 weeks. That's all the time I have to figure out how to make them listen. Down the hallway, she could hear her father talking in low tones with her mother, their voices blending into the low hum of the evening routine. Zainab realized she was gripping the phone so tightly her hand had begun to cramp. She set it aside and stood, drawing in a trembling breath. Tomorrow, she told herself, she would find the courage to speak up. For now, she needed to gather strength in the silent confines of her room, the phone her only confidant as her world shifted into dangerous new territory. They think they're just asking me to give up some casual pastime, like I don't have 1,000 fires burning behind the scenes. They don't realize it's not just a hobby, it's practically a business empire. It's my life's work, my real passion, and they have no clue, Zainab muttered to herself. Her other phone buzzed in its hiding place. Once, twice, 3 times. The Zara team would be getting anxious. The contract needed her signature, the campaign needed planning, and her latest post needed to go live in the next hour to maintain the engagement algorithm. Another buzz, then another. The sound felt like a ticking bomb. From inside the hidden compartment, she retrieved her influencer phone. 14 messages, 3 missed calls, and an email marked urgent. Contract deadline, response required. The Zara team needed an answer. The wedding preparations needed her attention. 2 futures stretched before her, and for the first time since she'd started her double life, Zainab couldn't see a way to choose both. The carefully constructed balance of her world wasn't just tipping, it was about to shatter completely. The evening arrived too quickly, each minute slipping through Zainab's grasp like grains of sand. She spent the afternoon in a half-focused haze, juggling 2 realities at once. In one ear, her AirPods buzzed with tense conference calls, emergency meetings about fabric samples, brand updates, and looming deadlines for the Zara campaign. She'd managed to buy herself 24 more hours from the Zara team by citing a family emergency, which wasn't entirely a lie. In the other, her mother's requests filtered through the hum of the kitchen. Chop the onions, stir the stew, fetch the extra plates from the cupboard. Zainab obeyed on autopilot, offering half-formed answers that satisfied no one fully. Despite her best efforts to be present in both places at once, her thoughts kept drifting to the dinner ahead, where a stranger, freshly arrived from London, was about to step into her life as if her future were merely an item on a timetable to be checked off. Now, she sat in their formal living room, her mother's best china laid out with steaming dishes of jollof rice, grilled fish, and moin moin. The scent of burning incense mixed with her mother's special occasion perfume. Zainab had chosen her most conservative outfit, a loose navy abaya with minimal embellishment. The ultimate picture of modesty, worlds away from the gold-threaded Ankara design she'd featured in yesterday's story. When Ibrahim entered behind his parents, Zainab kept her gaze lowered, as was expected, but even her modest glance caught surprising details. His shoes were limited edition Yeezy Boosts. She'd featured a similar pair in a sneaker collection review last month. His wrist, briefly visible as he adjusted his caftan, bore an Apple Watch Ultra. Their fathers dominated the conversation, discussing religious matters and community issues. Ibrahim spoke only when addressed, his responses thoughtful and articulate. But halfway through dinner, while the parents were deep in conversation about the wedding arrangements, Zainab noticed something that made her nearly drop her water glass. Ibrahim's phone had slipped partially from his pocket as he sat. The screen lit up with a notification, and she caught a glimpse of a familiar blue bird icon. Twitter, or as it was now known, X. More surprisingly, the notification preview showed a like on a tweet from one of the fashion blogs that frequently reposted her content. She glanced up, startled, and caught him quickly tucking the phone away. Their eyes met for a brief moment. The corner of his mouth twitched in what might have been a smile, and he smoothly rejoined the conversation, offering his views on the importance of maintaining traditional values in modern times. "Social media can be quite destructive to young minds," he said, his voice carrying the authority of his scholarly background. But Zainab noticed his choice of words carefully. However, when used with wisdom and purpose, technology can also serve to spread knowledge and understanding. His father nodded approvingly, but Zainab's mind was racing. The way he'd emphasized wisdom and purpose. It felt pointed, deliberate. She thought back to her follower list, trying to remember if she'd ever noticed his name or any variations of it. Her phone buzzed softly upstairs. Probably another message from Zara. But for the first time that day, her anxiety was tinged with something else. Curiosity. The man her parents described, the strict traditional scholar returning to enforce old ways, didn't quite match the person she was observing. His carefully curated appearance of orthodoxy felt familiar, almost like looking in a mirror. "More rice, Ibrahim?" her mother offered, breaking into her thoughts. "No, thank you," he replied politely, "but I would love the recipe for this jollof. Perhaps you could share it on paper?" There was that almost smile again, and this time Zainab was sure. He'd started to say, "share it online." She reached for her water again, using the moment to study him more carefully. The perfect image of a traditional scholar's son, yet those subtle hints of another life kept catching her eye. Like the locked screen of her second phone upstairs, she sensed there was more to Ibrahim than what showed on the surface. At 2 a.m., long after the guests had left and her parents had gone to bed, Zainab sat cross-legged on her prayer rug, both phones laid out before her. The Zara contract glowed on one screen, while Ibrahim's Facebook profile filled the other. She'd spent hours diving deep into his digital footprint, and what she found had shifted everything. She was startled when she had a gentle tap on the door. Mariam slowly opened the door, concern knitting her brows. "Z?" she whispered, slipping inside. "You're still awake? I saw the light under your door." Zainab glanced up, eyes tired but resolute. "I couldn't sleep," she murmured, indicating the two phones laid out before her. "Look." One screen displayed an official-looking document, the Zara contract, while the other was open to a social media profile. Mariam crept closer, curiosity sparking in her gaze. "Is that the contract you're supposed to sign? And Ibrahim's profile?" She paused as the realization sank in. "Wait, have you been digging into him online?" Zainab finished, lifting the second phone for Mariam to see. "Yes. Hours of scrolling, and it changed everything. On the surface, he seems like your typical imam's son. Community work, religious quotes. But then I found photos tagging him at tech conferences. His LinkedIn says he founded 2 startups in London." She tapped the screen, voice growing more animated. "And he follows these Muslim fashion influencers, big names who blend modesty with modern trends." Mariam's eyes widened. "So, he's not just the quiet, scholarly type we thought?" "Exactly," Zainab said, leaning forward. "During dinner, I noticed hints about his interest in technology, like the branded shoes he wore, his questions about social media, but I never imagined he'd actually be so worldly. Now I know he might understand my world." Mariam sank onto the rug beside her. "That changes things, right? What does it mean for you?" Zainab exhaled slowly, the weight on her chest easing. "It means this entire decision, marrying Ibrahim, taking on the Zara contract, doesn't have to be an either-or situation. I'm going to sign, but on my terms." Mariam raised an eyebrow. "You have terms?" A flicker of confidence lit Zainab's expression. "Yup. I'm writing an email to Mr. and Mrs. Suleiman, accepting the proposal but making it clear I'm not giving up my influencer platform. I want them to see it's not just about selfies and hashtags. I've done charity work, promoted modest designers, boosted small businesses. This isn't some frivolous hobby. It's real, and it matters." Pride sparked in Mariam's eyes. "You're attaching your @Zarambit posts? All the most meaningful ones. I want them to understand the big picture." Zainab paused to open a laptop on the floor. Then there's the Zara contract. Her fingers navigated a digital signature field. I'm signing it, and I'm adding a note asking if we can feature more Muslim fashion diversity in the first campaign. Imagine showcasing a range of modest designs, traditional and modern. If this is my big debut, I want it to stand for something. Mariam nodded, impressed. And Ibrahim? Zainab smiled, nerves evident but determination unwavering. I'm emailing him separately, asking him to meet me at the tech hub in town, neutral ground, but a place we can talk openly. I need to see if I've read him correctly or if I've just dreamed this up. If he's really as open-minded as I think, I'll know. Mariam reached out and squeezed her hand. Z, this is huge. You're risking everything. Zainab's voice trembled just enough to reveal her anxiety. I know, but it's worth it. If my only choices are living half a life or risking it all, I'm going to risk it. A small laugh escaped Mariam's lips. You sound calmer than you did before, less trapped. Because I'm not picking one world over the other, Zainab said. I'm trying to bring them together. I might lose it all, but at least it'll be my choice. Z, maybe just ask Ibrahim and talk to him directly and let him talk to his parents, Mariam suggested. You are right. Zainab hit send on Ibrahim's message, then set both phones aside. The click of the buttons echoed loudly in the quiet room. Mariam closed her eyes briefly, murmuring a small prayer. Bismillah, sis, I'm proud of you. Zainab swallowed, a sudden hush filling her chest. Bismillah, she whispered in return. Whatever happens next, I'm ready. They lingered there a moment, the only sound the hushed whirl of the ceiling fan. In that stillness, it felt as though the future had cracked open, offering both possibility and peril. But for now, Zainab had made her move, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope that she could exist wholly, with both family and ambition close at heart. The tech hub buzzed with the energy of a typical Zarambi workday. Young entrepreneurs huddled over laptops, developers argued about code in multiple languages, and the scent of overpriced artisanal coffee filled the air. Zainab had chosen a table in the corner, partially hidden by a towering indoor plant. She'd dressed carefully, a sophisticated burgundy hijab paired with a professional blazer, a look that straddled both her worlds. She was early, but Ibrahim was earlier. He sat at a table with 2 cups of coffee, his eyes fixed on his laptop screen. Gone was the traditional kaftan from the family dinner. Instead, he wore tailored slacks and a crisp button-down shirt. A conference badge from Zarambi Tech Week hung from his laptop bag. Before she could approach him, her phone buzzed. A notification from Instagram. At TechBro, Ibrahim had just followed at Zarambid Girl. Her heart skipped a beat as she opened his profile. It was new, created just hours after she'd sent her emails, but the bio made her catch her breath. Bridging tradition and innovation. Founder at Halal FinTech. Proud supporter of at Zarambid Girl's vision for modern modest fashion. Yes, that Ibrahim. She looked up from her phone to find him watching her, a knowing smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Oh, he's handsome. Much more than I first realized, she thought, pulse flickering at the hollow of her throat. The casual confidence in his gaze sent a warm rush through her, reminding her that she wasn't immune to such small, charged moments. She swallowed hard, fighting the urge to drop her eyes. Stay composed, Zainab, she warned herself, even as her heart drummed with unexpected fascination. On his table, beside the coffee cups, lay the latest issue of Vogue Arabia. Opened to a dog-eared page featuring one of her anonymous interviews about the future of modest fashion in Africa. I was wondering how long it would take you to figure it out, he said as she approached. I've been following your work for months. Your campaign with that modest sportswear brand? It helped us secure funding for our halal fitness app. He turned his laptop toward her. On the screen was a presentation titled The Digital Revolution of Traditional Values. And there, in high resolution, was a collection of her most successful campaign images, each annotated with engagement metrics and market impact data. You knew, Zainab said softly, sinking into the chair opposite him. "All along, you knew I was at Zarambit, girl." Ibrahim's smile widened. "My parents asked me to find a wife who shared our values. I did my research." He gestured to the presentation. "Did you know that your content has inspired over 50 Muslim women to start their own businesses? Or that your modest fashion styling tips have been shared in Islamic schools as examples of maintaining faith while pursuing modern careers?" Zainab reached for the coffee he'd bought her. Her exact preferred order, she noticed. Another piece of research, apparently. "Does your father know?" she asked, the question that had been burning in her mind. Ibrahim's expression turned thoughtful. "About at Zarambit, girl? Not yet. About my belief that Islam and innovation can coexist? We've been having that conversation for years." He leaned forward, his voice earnest. "That's actually why I wanted to meet. I have a proposal, and I don't mean the marriage kind. Well, not only that." He turned to the next slide in his presentation, and Zainab felt her breath catch. The logo at the top read Modest Mode, where tradition meets innovation, flanked by sleek graphics and a detailed plan that made her own influencer empire seem like just the opening act. This was more than a business pitch. It was a vision that bridged faith, culture, and cutting-edge ideas. Zainab shifted in her seat, her heart pounding. 1,000 new possibilities flashed through her mind. Creative collaborations, joint campaigns, maybe even a whole new platform for modest fashion. She glanced at Ibrahim, who was eyeing her just as intently. A spark danced between them, unspoken but unmistakable. He clicked through the slides: market research, growth projections, brand partnerships, and with every new detail her excitement grew. Suddenly, what had begun as a cautious meeting felt electric. Her professional and personal worlds collided in a way she'd never anticipated, and the resulting jolt was equal parts inspiration and intrigue. By the time he finished speaking, she lifted her gaze from the final slide, stats and bullet points about leveraging influencer networks, and met his eyes. There it was again, that flicker of recognition, as though they both realized they were standing on the edge of something bigger than either had planned. When the meeting wrapped up, they exchanged a brief, charged look before parting ways, each feeling the residue of that electric moment. Whatever else this might mean for Zainab, for her future, her ambitions, and her rapidly evolving life, it was clear they'd just opened a door to something that went beyond business. And they both walked away knowing they wanted to step through it. The next week passed in a blur of encrypted messages, secret meetings, and carefully orchestrated family dinners. By day, Zainab and Ibrahim played the roles of traditional bride and groom, attending marriage counseling with his father, discussing wedding preparations, and enduring endless cups of tea with visiting relatives. By night, they were business partners, plotting their digital empire over video calls that lasted until Fajr prayer. Modest Mode was brilliant in its simplicity, a platform that would bring together modest fashion influencers, halal businesses, and Muslim entrepreneurs. Ibrahim's tech expertise, combined with Zainab's influencer network, could create something revolutionary. But first, they had to navigate the delicate matter of their families. "We need to train my father's algorithm," Ibrahim joked during one late-night strategy session, using tech speak that had become their private language. Feed him small bits of data until he accepts the bigger update. The process began subtly. At a family dinner, Ibrahim casually mentioned a successful Muslim woman who'd built a halal cosmetics empire. His father nodded approvingly at the business acumen, while his mother noted how the woman maintained her religious values. Zainab followed up by asking thoughtful questions about Islamic principles regarding commerce and social responsibility. Meanwhile, she executed her professional obligations like a careful dance. The Zara contract was signed, but she negotiated for all shoots to be done in Dubai, explaining to her family that her accounting firm had sent her on extended business trips. Ibrahim covered for her absences by engaging their parents in wedding preparations, strategically scheduling family meetings around her campaign commitments. But the pressure was mounting. Her follower count hit 1 million the same week Ibrahim's father announced he'd chosen a date for the Nikah ceremony. The Zara campaign photos were scheduled to be released in 10 days. Their families were pushing for a joint wedding announcement in the community newsletter. Zainab rubbed at her exhausted eyes, still feeling the after-effects of an all-night photo shoot. She pushed open her bedroom door, longing for a moment of quiet, only to find her mother standing in the center of the room, holding a glossy designer shoebox with the lid askew. "Zainab," her mother said slowly, turning the box in her hands, "where did these shoes come from?" A cold wave of panic rippled through Zainab. She'd forgotten to hide the evidence of her latest brand collaboration, a limited edition pair of heels she was supposed to photograph for her feed. Normally, she had a polished story ready, but her sleep-deprived brain felt like it was wading through quicksand. She stumbled over her words. "Oh, they're friends. Her mother set the box on the bed and fixed her with a stare. "Friends? Then why is the receipt addressed to you, and why did I see matching designer tags in the trash bin?" Zainab swallowed hard, trying to steady her shaky hands. I was helping someone with a school project." "Zainab," her mother interrupted, her eyes narrowing with worry and growing suspicion. "We haven't seen you at dinner for days. You come home all hours of the night, and now I find expensive shoes hidden in your room. Tell me the truth." Zainab fumbled for a plausible excuse, but her brain refused to cooperate. She knows. She's putting the pieces together. She could feel her mother's disappointment forming a tangible wall between them. Every time she tried to speak, the words caught in her throat. In that tense hush, her mother carefully set the shoes back in the box. "You know you can talk to me about anything," she said, but the undertone was clear. "You haven't been talking to me, and I'm scared of what you're hiding." Zainab's exhaustion made the moment feel even more fragile. She finally sank onto the edge of the bed, running a hand over her face. "Mom, it's not what you think," she managed, voice cracking. But the truth hovered in the room, looming larger than any excuse she could muster. Her mother sat beside her, but not too close. She pressed her lips together before speaking again. "Tell me, Zainab. Tell me what's really going on." A quick glance at the open shoebox, and Zainab's heart pounded at the realization. There was no more room for half-truths or delays. Everything was unraveling right here, right now, and she had no idea how she was going to keep her carefully constructed secrets from collapsing all around her. In the heavy silence that followed, Zainab's phone lit up with a message from Ibrahim. "Time to push the update. I've just told my father I need to give a speech at the mosque." Zainab looked at her mother's worried face and made a decision. "Mama," she said softly, "you're right. There is something I need to tell you, but not just you, everyone. And Ibrahim will help me explain." Her mother's expression shifted from concern to curiosity. "Ibrahim? What does he have to do with your secret?" Zainab smiled, thinking of the presentation they'd spent all week preparing for the mosque speech. "Everything, Mama. He has everything to do with it. And after Friday prayer, you'll understand why Allah brought our families together in ways you never expected." The mosque was packed for Friday prayers, unusually so for a regular weekend. Word had spread that the imam's London-educated son would be giving a special address about youth and technology. The air was thick with anticipation and the sweet smoke of Bakur incense. Zainab sat with her mother in the women's section, her heart thundering beneath her carefully chosen outfit, a handcrafted abaya from a Muslim designer she'd featured last Ramadan. The Zara campaign photos were scheduled to release in just 3 days. Everything hinged on today. Ibrahim stood at the podium, commanding yet humble in his bearing. But it was what lay on the table beside him that caught Zainab's attention. A silver laptop decorated with subtle geometric patterns that she recognized from her own Modest Mode brand mood board. They'd stayed up until 3 a.m. finalizing those designs. "Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim," Ibrahim began traditionally, his voice steady. "Today, I want to speak about how our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was not just a spiritual leader, but also a revolutionary businessman who embraced the most advanced commercial practices of his time." A murmur of interest rippled through the congregation. In the front row, Ibrahim's father nodded approvingly, though his mother looked slightly puzzled at this unexpected opening. As Ibrahim spoke, he wove together religious teachings with contemporary examples. He talked about Khadijah, the Prophet's wife, and her status as a successful businesswoman. He discussed how the earliest Muslims had innovated trade routes and banking systems. With each example, he clicked through slides that looked deceptively simple, but contained careful hints that Zainab recognized. Statistics from her campaigns, though unnamed, global modest fashion market figures that they'd compiled together. Then came the moment that made Zainab's pulse race. Ibrahim picked up his phone, holding it up for all to see. Many of us fear that technology and social media will lead our youth astray from our values, he said. But let me show you something remarkable. Right here in Zarambi, there are young Muslims using these tools to spread our values, support our communities, and build ethical businesses. He opened his Instagram profile, his public, scholarly one, and followed someone new right there in front of the entire congregation. The projector screen behind him showed the action in real time. Zainab watched her mother lean forward, squinting at the familiar handle that appeared, @Zarambit Girl. This account, Ibrahim continued, his voice taking on a tone of barely contained excitement, has raised over 10 million naira for Islamic charities. It has helped hundreds of Muslim women start halal businesses. It has shown the world that modesty and modernity can coexist beautifully. A few rows ahead, Zainab spotted her father's shoulders stiffen. He was an avid follower of business news. Surely he recognized the engagement statistics Ibrahim was sharing. Her mother's hand found hers in the dim light, squeezing with a pressure that felt like a question. But it was Ibrahim's mother's reaction that truly caught her attention. The older woman was smiling, not with surprise, but with what looked remarkably like pride. And there, tucked partially behind her prayer mat, was the latest issue of Vogue Arabia, the same issue Ibrahim had brought to their meeting at the tech hub. Suddenly, Zainab realized this wasn't just Ibrahim's carefully planned revelation. They weren't the only ones who had been laying groundwork. As if confirming her thoughts, Ibrahim's mother turned slightly, caught her eye, and winked. The aftermath of the Friday speech erupted into chaos, but not the kind Zainab had expected. As families poured out of the mosque into the humid Zarambi afternoon, her father wasn't shouting about deception or family honor. Instead, he was furiously working his phone, his fingers flying over the screen with uncharacteristic speed. "Bint," he called out, his voice carrying across the mosque courtyard. "Why didn't you tell me you were behind the halal investment app promotion? Do you know how much money my friends and I made from that campaign?" Before Zainab could respond, Ibrahim's father cleared his throat. The crowd parted respectfully for the imam, but what he held in his hands made Zainab's world tilt on its axis. A sleek tablet displaying the modest mode business proposal. Not the version she and Ibrahim had prepared for today, but a more detailed one, complete with 5 years of projected financials and Sharia compliance certificates. "Your mother," the imam said to Ibrahim, though his eyes were fixed on Zainab, "has been quite persistent in her research. She believed she had found the perfect match for you, not just in faith and character, but in business vision. Though I must admit her PowerPoint presentations were quite persuasive." Ibrahim's mother stepped forward, her elegant abaya rustling. "Did you really think you were the only ones who could navigate between tradition and technology?" She smiled at Zainab. "I've been following @Zarambit Girl since you posted that brilliant piece about modernizing traditional African fabrics for modest wear. I recognized your writing style from the essay you submitted to the Islamic Women's Business Council, the one you won first prize for under your real name." The pieces started falling into place. The convenient business trips Ibrahim's father had taken during her major campaign shoots. The way her own mother had suddenly stopped questioning her designer accessories. The suspicious ease with which both families had accepted their quick engagement. "We wanted to see if you two would find your way to each other honestly," Ibrahim's mother continued, "to watch you both struggle with the same challenges we once faced, balancing tradition with progress, faith with innovation." Zainab turned to her own mother, who was failing to suppress a smile. "Those prayer beads you've been using to count your daily du'as?" her mother said. "I ordered them from your online store 6 months ago, Your product descriptions have always been very distinctive." The Zara contract notification chose that moment to buzz on her phone. But before she could reach for it, Ibrahim's father spoke again. "I believe," he said with deliberate emphasis, "that the community would benefit greatly from a formal announcement of both the wedding and the business launch, perhaps in conjunction with your upcoming international campaign." Zainab's head snapped up. The imam's eyes twinkled. "The halal fashion industry needs strong leadership in Zarambi. Who better than a couple who understands both the spiritual and digital realms?" The courtyard had grown crowded as people lingered, sensing the unfolding of something momentous. Phones were out, recording the scene. Later, Zainab would realize this too had been orchestrated. The first public merger of her two identities happening on her own terms, surrounded by her community. But in that moment, all she could focus on was the fact that she'd spent months orchestrating an elaborate revelation, only to discover she'd been part of an even more elaborate plan. She looked at Ibrahim, who appeared equally stunned, then back at their mothers, who were now openly grinning. "I think," Ibrahim's mother said, pulling out her phone, "it's time for your first official post as @Zarambiat Girl. Your followers have been waiting to meet the woman behind the influence." 3 months later, Zainab sat in her new office, surrounded by mood boards and campaign mock-ups for Modest Mode's launch. The Zara campaign had been a global success, with her wedding photo, featuring a custom-designed modest wedding dress, becoming their most engaged post of the year. But it was what she discovered during the wedding preparations that had truly changed everything. It happened a week before the nikah, during a traditional henna ceremony. The older women were sharing stories of their own weddings when Ibrahim's grandmother, a dignified woman in her 70s, asked to see Zainab's phone. "Not that one," she said when Zainab reached for her personal phone. "The other one. The one for your fashion business." Before Zainab could recover from her surprise, the elderly woman had navigated to Instagram with practiced ease and pulled up an account that made everyone in the room gasp. @the original Zaramba Girl. The profile showed yellowed photographs from the 1960s. A young Zaramban woman modeling fusion fashion that combined traditional and Western elements, accompanied by meticulously written captions about style, tradition, and female empowerment. The early posts were photographs of magazine clippings and newspaper articles. Later ones had been digitized from old slides and negatives. "You didn't think you invented the idea of bridging worlds, did you?" Ibrahim's grandmother smiled, scrolling through her feed with the expertise of a social media native. "I started documenting Zarambe fashion right after independence. Of course, back then I had to use magazines and word of mouth. Instagram is much more efficient." The photos told an extraordinary story. Ibrahim's grandmother had been one of Zarambi's first fashion influencers, working with international brands while maintaining her cultural identity. She'd hidden her modeling career from her conservative family by using a pseudonym, while simultaneously building a network of similarly forward-thinking Muslim women. "We called ourselves the Progressive Sisters," she explained. "Every major city had at least one of us: Zarambi, Kano, Kaduna. We shared strategies for convincing our families, tips for maintaining modesty in high fashion, and business opportunities. Sound familiar?" She pulled out a leather-bound album filled with letters, contracts, and photographs. "Your Modest Mode idea? We had something similar in 1975, but the technology wasn't ready. We've been waiting for someone to revive it properly." The room fell silent as she turned to the final page, revealing a faded photograph of a group of elegantly dressed women posed in front of a shop sign. "Modern Modesty Boutique, where tradition meets style." "The shop failed after 2 years," Ibrahim's grandmother said, "but the network survived. In fact..." She glanced meaningfully around the room at the other older women, who were all suddenly very interested in their henna patterns. "Let's just say, @Zarambit Girl had some guardian angels helping her posts reach the right audiences." Zainab looked at her mother-in-law-to-be, remembering how quickly her influence had grown, how certain partnerships had seemed to fall into place mysteriously easily. "The Progressive Sisters? They're still active?" "My dear," Ibrahim's grandmother laughed, pulling up another Instagram account on her phone, this one filled with sophisticated photography of modest fashion from around the world. We're viral. Now, sitting in her office, Zainab smiled at the framed photo on her wall. 4 generations of Muslim women, from Ibrahim's grandmother to her youngest niece, each wearing a fusion of traditional and modern fashion. Below it sat a plaque announcing Modest Mode's first initiative, a mentorship program connecting established female Muslim entrepreneurs with aspiring influencers. Her phone buzzed. A notification from @TheOriginalZarambi commenting on her latest post. The comment simply read, "The torch passes on. Alhamdulillah." Zainab picked up her phone, just one now, no hiding needed, and began to type. Announcing Modest Mode's newest board member, the woman who started it all. The future, she realized, wasn't about choosing between worlds or even bridging them. It was about recognizing that they had never truly been separate. Someone had always been weaving them together, one story at a time. Thank you for watching and listening to our short stories. Subscribe and like for more stories like this.